everybody. Welcome to the live stream. Today we are going to be discussing the Great Displacement by Jake Biddle. I'm excited to have you here, whether you're joining the live or you're watching the replay. Thank you for making time to do a deep dive into a powerful, important book with me. Tonight, like I said, we're going to be talking about The Great Displacement by Jake Biddle, a nonfiction exploration of climate change, migration, and the human cost of environmental crisis in the United States. If this is your first time joining the stream, hi, I'm Lovely. Thank you so much for joining me. I run this book club where we explore thought-provoking stories that challenge us, inspire us, and help us grow. If you're in the chat, feel free to drop your name and where you're tuning in from. Give me a little wave so I know that you are there. Before we do jump into our book, that's Jake right there, y'all. I have a few announcements. Let me just hop on over here and grab my little sheets. Also, too, y'all, it is incredibly windy today in good old Pueblo, and sometimes that messes with the internet. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, and hopefully that won't happen, but just in case it does, it is the internet, it is the wind, and I think it's like 30, 40-mile wind out there right now. I don't know why it does that, but que sera, sera. So the first announcement that we have is going to be this Saturday, April the 19th, from 3 until 5 p.m. We're going to be having a family matinee right here at Lamb Library. It's Finding Dory. Join us for Finding Dory. There's going to be popcorn. All ages are welcome, so please come and join us. Let's see what else we got. On Tuesday, April the 29th, from 5 to 6:30 p.m. in honor of Earth Day, we are going to be having a program called Make a Kokidama. It's like a little plant. It's a fun, it's a hands-on activity where you learn the art of Kokidama, a Japanese gardening technique that transforms plants into living sculptures. Supplies provided while supplies last. I don't think that you have to sign up for this particular event. It's happening across the district, so you'll have other chances. Well, actually, you might have missed some. Let's see. What's today's date? So it's the 17th today. So there's it's happening also at Greenhorn, Jidone, and Pueblo West, and Lucero is going to be tomorrow. But the one that you want to come to is going to be on the 29th at Lamb Library right here. From 5 till 6:30 p.m. And then also something that's super, super important, y'all. We are having FAFSA college workshops. So that's the free application for federal student aid. And they're going to be workshops that will teach your student or yourself how to sign up and navigate that system. It's going to be on Saturdays from 9:30 a.m. all the way to 4:30 p.m. There's going to be one on May the 10th at Barkman, May 17th at Pueblo West, and May 24th right here at Lamb Library. For more information or what documentation that you need to bring, you can contact Teresa Vega at 719-549-2563. Walk-ins are welcome, but registration is encouraged, and there will also be folks on hand who can speak Spanish. Again, that phone number to contact so you can find out what documentation you need to bring is 719-549-2563. Okay, and then the last thing that I needed to do is just send out a quick note to folks on the Facebook to come and watch this. Hold on one second, y'all. I can't even tell if I'm broadcasting on my own page. Let me see. There I am. Okay, good. I'm sorry, y'all. I couldn't find it. Okay, hold on a second. Come and join the discussion about The Great Displacement by Jake Biddle. Okay, there. I find that I have to enunciate when I'm doing that text to voice. Otherwise, it makes my T's sound like D's. That's neither here nor there. So we've done our announcements. Let me just jump on in real quick. Let's do this one. Okay, now let me do this. Okay, great. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about the author of today's book. So Jake Biddle is a journalist based in Brooklyn who covers climate change and energy. His work has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Harper's Magazine, and a number of other publications. He is also a contributing writer for Grist. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the themes that we have in the book, some of the accolades. So this book just came out in 2023, and it's already been shortlisted for the 2024 Carnegie Medal for Excellence. And some of the themes and tropes that are found in this book, this is by far, not all of them, we're just scratching the surface, but we'll be discussing the reluctant hero, David versus Goliath, the vanishing home, and the journey narrative, kind of like what's his name? Not like the hero's journey, but similar to the hero's journey, if you're familiar with that phrase. There's some other themes as well as climate migration as the next migration, inequity and vulnerability, the role of government and institutions, and resilience versus relocation. I'm sure we're going to talk about all of those things because it's throughout the book. Okay, so... Oh, hang on. Let me pop this back. We're not ready for discussion questions yet. Hold on, friends. Let me get my head. Boom. There I am. Okay. So I really, really enjoyed this book. One of the things that I like the most about this book is the personal stories and how Jake was interviewing these people, but he did not glorify their pain and glorify their tragedy. And there's a lot to go around in this book, and that's really easy to do, especially if you're trying to sensationalize things. But I really enjoyed the fact that he took time to really listen to the people who he was talking to and interviewing them and trying to be as unbiased as possible, I guess is what I could say. So basically this book is really, and I'm looking down at my notes, that's what you guys see me reading. So this book is deeply rooted in investigative journalism and storytelling. And Jake takes us across the country from Louisiana to California, Florida to Alaska, introducing us to people whose lives have been permanently changed by the effects of climate change. So we're not just talking about the future, we're talking about it now. One of the things that we're talking about things that are happening now. One of the things that he talks about in interviews that I read for preparation of the book club is how a lot of times issues around climate change and global warming are about future projections. In 30 years, we will lose this much land and these many species and yada, yada, yada. And so it doesn't talk about what is actually happening now. And I think, and he mentions this in some interviews as well, that is contributing to some people's attitude that climate change is not actually happening, global warming is not a thing, despite the levels of science that say otherwise. A lot of people just think that they got hit with bad luck. And that can be a reasonable thing to come up with, depending on who you are and the walks of life that you are or that you're in and what you've been exposed to. The thing that I liked about how Jake conducted these interviews is that he didn't care if the people he was interviewing, he didn't care if they believed in climate change or not. For him, that was not the point. And for me personally, that's not the point either. Because do you want to be right or do you want to help these people? Do you want to be right or do you want to make this situation that's horrible for everybody involved? You want to make it better. That was his point. And that these types of discussions are my point too. I'm never trying to convince anybody of something they don't want to be convinced of. But if we all can agree that people who go through horrible natural disasters need to get helped quickly and fairly, and they need everything that we can give them, that we can possibly give them to make a really hard time in their life less hard. I think most people can agree upon that. And in fact, a lot of the interviews that he conducted show that that is where a lot of people do agree on. But I've gotten a little bit ahead of myself. I tend to do that when I like a book and I got a lot of notes. Green screen. Hang on, let me put it here. I have a lot of notes. So we're going to try to get through some of this. We're definitely not going to get through all of them, but that's okay. Why don't I start by reading an excerpt of the book for you? Let me see. Let's start. All right. Introduction. The town had been there for a century and a half. Then one evening in the summer of 2021, it disappeared. Greenville was a mountain hamlet of about 1,000 people nestled in the mountainous wilderness of northeast California. The town had sprung up as a mining outpost during the gold rush, and buildings from that era still dotted its main street. The local economy was sluggish, and most residents were far from wealthy, but the community was close-knit. And one resident later recalled, we'd go to the local grocery store, and sometimes it would take over an hour to get out, just to run in and get a gallon of milk or something, because we knew everybody. So they were stopping and speaking to one another, as you do. Some residents had moved to Greenville from the Bay Area in search of cheap housing, and while others relished the town's distance from urban sprawl. A writer from Greenville would later recall a social tapestry made up of retirees, hippies, bikers, rednecks, ranchers, and cowboys. Inside the valley, insulated from the mountains by a screen of trees, it was easy to forget the rest of the world. On the evening of August 4th, 2021, one of the largest wildfires in U.S. history breached the valley surrounding Greenville. The Dixie Fire had been smoldering for weeks. Nearby, but a sudden wind from the south had sent it spiraling to the northeast. It moved throughout the valley like a blowtorch, as one resident put it, destroying 3/4 of the town's buildings in a matter of minutes. Houses erupted into fluttering tufts of flame. Cars shriveled up like dried flowers. Light poles and stop signs doubled over. Trees dissolved into yellow air. The fire obliterated the library, the pharmacy, the baseball field where the Little League teams played, and the streets that hosted the annual Gold Diggers Mine Festival. It incinerated boxes full of family photos, heirloom rifles, children's toys, and workaday silverware sets. 170 years of history and memory evaporated into soot and haze. The disaster did not end once the fire burned out. It took months for the federal government to arrive in Greenville with emergency trailers that could shelter displaced residents. In the meantime, the refugees from the town scattered across the state to find temporary housing, forced into a wrenching exile from their homes. Greenville's working-class residents had come to the town because it was affordable, and now they struggled to find alternative shelter elsewhere in the state. California's housing shortage had jacked rents up to unprecedented levels, even in places that had seen no wildfire damage. And many victims had to search for months before they found apartments they could afford. Some were priced out of California altogether, while others left the state by choice, terrified of living through another fire season. A few of the victims had moved to Greenville from the town of Paradise after the Camp Fire 3 years earlier, only to find themselves burned out again. Meanwhile, many who wanted to return to Greenville found that they lacked the means to do so. In the years before the fire, insurance companies had started to pull out of the town, telling residents the area was too risky to insure. and many victims who had lost their homes in the fire did not have sufficient insurance coverage to rebuild. They moved to nearby towns and cities instead, 10 or 20 miles away, and found themselves slipping into new lives. The few hundred residents who did return found the town in a state of permanent limbo. The scarred landscape around them was haunting and hostile, frozen in the moments after the fire. The natural beauty of Greenville's secluded valley, the affordable housing stock that had attracted artists and eccentrics, the close social ties that had bound community together, everything that made Greenville what it was had vanished. The destruction of this quirky mining town and displacement of its residents function as a parable for what the next century of climate change will bring to the rest of the country. The summer of the Dixie Fire saw a series of climate calamities strike almost every corner of the United States. There was another historic fire near Lake Tahoe, a monstrous hurricane in Louisiana, a millennium-scale drought across the Southwest. Thousands of people lost their houses to a tide of storm surge, or watched their communities go up in smoke, or suffered beneath lethal temperatures. By the end of the year, 1 in 3 Americans had experienced a weather disaster of some kind. For a long time, climate change was something to be discussed in abstract terms, something that existed in the future tense. That is no longer the case. Each passing year brings disasters that disfigure new parts of the United States, and these disasters alter the course of human lives, pushing people from one place to another, destroying old communities and forcing new ones to emerge. This book tells the firsthand stories of people whose lives have already been touched by climate change, who have already lost their homes and their histories to a crisis that millions more of us will soon confront. It draws on hundreds of original interviews and thousands of pages of research to show how climate disasters expose fundamental flaws in where and how we have chosen to build our communities. It also illustrates how government disaster policy and private housing market combine to push people away from the riskiest places in the aftermath of floods and fires, creating a cycle of displacement and relocation. But this book is also a portrait of a generation of domestic climate migrants, one that is growing larger every year. These people live in every corner of the country, from the waterlogged streets of Miami to the parched cotton fields of Arizona. Pause for a second. Y'all, I didn't know they were growing cotton in Arizona. I had no idea, but here we go. They run the gamut of minimum wage workers to millionaires. Hold on. They run the gamut from minimum wage workers to millionaires, in big coastal cities to entrenched small town conservatives. Their stories range from the tragic to the comic, and from the inspiring to the infuriating. Indeed, there is only one thing they all have in common: they're moving. Okay, so that's how the book starts. One of the things that I noticed right off the top is that this book, The Great Displacement, is a play off of the Great Migration. And he also goes to mention that. And y'all know I never miss a chance to mention my grannies. Y'all know my grandmother and my great-grandmother were a part of the Great Migration of Black folks who moved from the South and started moving up north for better jobs, better racial tolerance, more opportunities. In fact, the other thing that I don't miss a chance to tell y'all is that right up the road, Denver was known as the Harlem of the West because it had such a huge, thriving Black population. And y'all really need to do a little deep dive into the 5 Points neighborhood. There's so much history there. It's so rich and vibrant. And I actually had more than two, but I have connections to that because my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my grandparents all were leaving the South for better opportunities up in the North. So anyway, he goes on to say that that the Great Migration moved a lot of Black people from the South to the North. And he was saying that that was something that was more controlled, more, you can see a clear lineal shift if you're looking at it like if you graphed it out on a chart. And what he is comparing, the reason why he's comparing it to is because climate change or those intra-community people who are moving, what did he just say? He didn't call them refugees because that's people coming from other countries, but they are climate exiles. I guess that's the word that I'm trying to say. More people have already dealt with having to move because of climate changes than what happened in the Great Migration. And that was one thing. Here, let me just read what he has to say so I can put it in his own words. The title of this book is an oblique reference to the Great Migration, the largest single migration event in American history. From the 1920s to the 1970s, more than 6 million Black people left the South and moved to northern cities like New York and Chicago, fleeing an economic humanitarian crisis. They left to escape the yoke of Jim Crow, the rampant flooding along the Mississippi, and the economic stagnation of the former plantation states, and flocked to the North for good-paying industrial jobs and the promise of racial tolerance. There have been other nationwide migrations since, from the Dust Bowl exodus to the Sun Belt boom, and many of these migrations have been driven by crises and upheavals, but none anywhere near so consequential as the Great Migration. The Harlem Renaissance, the Civil Rights Movement, and the rise of hip hop and blues can all be traced back to this seismic shift. By the end of the century, climate change will displace more people in the United States than moved during the Great Migration, uprooting millions of people in every region of the country. So his point is, it's huge. If the Great Migration, of which my ancestors were a part of, had a very huge impact on America, on the country, on the way things looked, this climate change and the displacement of people who have to move because they don't have a choice is going to have an even greater impact than what that did. And we all know that Black people's impact on this country is we push the culture. And so that's how important this is. That is the gist of this whole book. All right, so let me see. Let's see where we are. Let me check the comments. While I'm doing that, talk amongst yourself. Let me see if there's any question in the comments. I also want to remind y'all to share the live stream out. If this is something that you like, please remember to share the live stream. It lets the algorithm know you like what I'm doing. And if you enjoy the book club, share the wealth. Let your friends know to come on by. We got plenty of room for everybody here. Also, please remember to like the Lovely from the Library Facebook page. Again, that lets the algorithm know that, hey, people like what I'm doing over here. It will send this live stream out to other people as well. So I appreciate that. Let me get rid of that. And what are we doing here? I was checking comments to see if I have any. All right, I'm good to go. Perfect. All right, so let me continue on. All right, let me see. Yeah, we've already talked about this. Sometimes I get ahead of myself, y'all, so I'm just gonna. Okay, so one of the things that we're talking about is climate change is happening now. So this book makes it clear that climate displacement is not some future dystopia. It's already here. It's reshaping communities. So I think one of the things that this book did is it did change the way that I personally view the climate crisis. And again, when I'm talking about stuff, I'm not trying to stand from up high and, I know about climate change. And I didn't even, reading this book really helped me to wrap my brain around how devastating, not only, first of all, that's not the hard part, wrapping your brain around how devastating some of these instances are. Not some of them, all of them. Let me speak more clearly. Hold on a second, y'all. I'm trying to do too many things at one time. There we go. What are we doing here? There. Okay. Whoops. Hold on, friends. That's okay. I can't make it work. I need a mouse is what I need. But anywho, the point of this is, though, I think that a lot of times people are not paying attention to how often so many of these natural disasters keep happening over and over and over again. And it looks like it's bad luck, but when it's happening with increasing frequency, there's something that is causing that. And even though I know a lot of the science behind it and whatnot, I had one of the closest experience that I have ever had with climate change was Hurricane Katrina. I fortunately was not in Louisiana, never lived there, never actually even been, unfortunately. But I lived in Texas when that happened, and there were so many people who were displaced. They had to go to the surrounding areas, and a lot of that was Texas. Y'all don't make me do geography publicly, because now I'm gonna have to show you how bad my geography was taught in my school. But some of the surrounding areas, Alabama, Georgia, different places like that, they all had to leave and go there. The people in Louisiana were priced out. Bourbon Street was underground. Fifth Ward and Fourth Ward, a lot of them went to Dallas and Houston and Austin and never went back home. They couldn't even have their Mardi Gras the way that they normally did. And they talk about this in this book too, about how when people are displaced, so are communities, so are cultures. There were a lot of Zulu houses in Louisiana, and I know that that's a huge thing right now on Twitter and on TikTok, and how people are fighting about who is a Zulu and why y'all got that paint on y'all's face. That's not what I'm talking about. I didn't want to acknowledge it, but that's not what we're talking about right now. But when those people were displaced and they left and they had to relocate, they took their culture with them. But they also left communities behind that they were a part of, that depended on them to help keep that structure in place. So I really like how Jake Biddle took the time to really emphasize that. In fact, there is one story that he is in the book where he's talking about Lincoln Town. It is it's in chapter 3. Let me see if I can get on over there real quick. Let me see. Or actually, I think it might be chapter 5. Where it's chapter 5. Lincoln City is what I'm talking about. So that neighborhood was given to the descendants of former enslaved people, and the land that they were given was always kind of swampy. The plantation owners didn't have any use for it because it was always flooding, but these folks made the best of it. And their town got flooded and it kept getting washed away, and they did a neighborhood buyout, but this was FEMA's first time doing such a thing. They did not have everything in place. A lot of the homes did not get enough of a value for the, hold on. Pardon me, y'all. A lot of the insurance companies were not giving the insured enough money to put a down payment on a new home and to move away. The values of their homes were not high enough, or they did not have enough insurance coverage too. And so those people could not go back because FEMA and the governments decided to let the Neuse or the river take that land back. and because it was just going to keep flooding and keep flooding. But community members would have reunions every year. Every single year they would have reunions, and it got so much so that those reunions started to be a tourist draw. And they have had reunions since the flood. I think they didn't do one when COVID first came on the scene, and so they couldn't do it because of regulations. But the community still maintained its ties. There were people who had never even lived in Lincoln City who would come to those reunions. Also, Lincoln City was another one of those hubs again where Black folks could get land and be in community with people. So you had teachers, doctors, lawyers, um, uh, uh, butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, plumbers, everyday kind of work people too, who were all living in that area and were all a part of a big community. And they all had to move because nobody was going to keep insuring their homes and helping them to rebuild in an area that was just going to get flooded and flooded and flooded. Another story that I really like that I want to talk on briefly is in Key West. The town in Key West, or the city in Key West, where is it called? It starts with a G. Hang on a second, y'all. Because this one got hit by Hurricane Irma, which was really bad too. And I think it might have been Greenville. I think that's what the town might have been called. Anywho, one of the main people in this story was a man named Patrick who bought this land called the Grove that had a lot of tropical fruit plants on it. Again, this island in Key West was for working class people who I'm going to say the archipelago, because it's not Key West. It's like islands off of Key West. But this is where all the hospitality workers, they would live there because they couldn't afford to live in Key West, but a lot of them could afford to live in these little offshoot towns. And a big hurricane came through and it wiped everything out. This one man in particular, Patrick, he had had a wife and children, and they all, when a storm was coming, the wife and the children were visiting in Brazil, and so they just stayed there. And he was working to reestablish his land, reestablish the grove. They were growing things like durian and mangoes and all kind of tropical fruits in the grove. And it was like a community project where he would have people come in and help, and they would teach classes and things like that. But when this area got flooded, and the islands, first of all, these islands were never meant to be habitable anyway because of all the flooding. But because of a mixture of circumstances where real estate developers came in and was developing and developing without any thought to what the future might hold, it caused a lot of infrastructure problems for the cities and for the governments of these towns, because now the government had to decide how much money are we willing to put into a town where these roads are just going to get flooded out. Anyway, in some cases, like in Greenville, there were people who had to organize their own cleanups. They had to come in. That's the whole David and Goliath trope and the reluctant hero tropes. They had to come in and clean things up because it was taking FEMA a very long time to get there. And also, a lot of the times there were not enough money to go around. There we go. This is what I'm trying to do, y'all. Boom. That's what I'm trying to do. There was, not a lot of infrastructure happening to help them clean up this mess, to help them get past all of this. And this one man, I said in my notes, said Patrick's life became a country song. He lost his dog, he lost his wife, he lost his children, he lost everything. And he finally had to give up the ghost because he couldn't afford to build on his land, because FEMA, to get the money that FEMA was promising, you have to meet certain criteria, and he couldn't afford it because he had sunk so much into trying to save the trees and save the grove. There are other places in that Key West area. I say Key West. I guess that is. the area to call it, or the Southern Florida, I guess I could also say that. A lot of local businesses were lost. This man had his own taxi business, but without anybody living there to taxi around, he couldn't afford to stay there because he had no income. There were churches that were there. This one church bought a lot of mattresses and things like that, and helped people who were in trailer homes. They put them up in one of the church's areas, and then that church, after they got these people set up, the people started volunteering for the cleanup, and then the church ended up buying trailers and put those people in trailers on drier land. So I said all that to say that a lot of this cleanup was done by people who were invested in the community. If you've ever been to Key West, they call themselves conchs, C-O-N-C-H, conchs, like the conch shell. And that is a kind of, I don't want to say an outlaw lifestyle, but they pride themselves on being resilient and community minded and having a dedication to the Keys that people might not always understand or even appreciate. So a lot of that type of characteristic, though, is what drove these people to try and support their community and rebuild. But so many people were depressed afterward. They had lost everything. All the trees were flattened, or their houses were underwater or washed out to sea. And so many people just could not come back. A lot of times people had to go where they had a place to live or jobs that they could do. And so this is another thing, that the displacement that happens due to climate change, when we're losing community and we are losing culture as well. Let's see. Let me see what else, because we're getting close to time. Let me see anything. Oh, you know what? Let's see what we got here. Any questions? I think. Let me do this really quickly. Yeah, we've talked about the reluctant hero, David versus Goliath, vanishing home, and what that means when a neighborhood is changed, when the people who actually make up the neighborhood are no longer there. What do you have? Just a collection of buildings and structures with no heart to drive culture or community. So that's that. Let me see. We're almost done here. Let me see if there's any more points that I want to talk about. Some people choose to stay and rebuild. Others were forced to leave. What factors influence these decisions, and how does the book explore this complexity? So that is the resilience versus relocation theme and or trope. And again, sometimes people are made to be resilient when they don't want to be. A lot of people did want to stay, but they couldn't afford to. And so they had to make choices of, do I stay and keep rebuilding, and hope that no other flood or fires or anything like that happens? Or do I move on? Do I get while the getting is good? Those are a lot of things that people had to discuss and really make some hard decisions about. One question is, do you think resilience and relocation are mutually exclusive options? And I don't think so. I don't think that if you leave, you're any less resilient than the people who stayed. It takes a lot of resiliency to pick up, move to a place where you don't know anybody, you don't have any connections, and to make those connections again, to find employment again, and to build community. That takes a lot of resilience. And I honestly don't know how many times we can ask people to constantly do this over and over and over again before they break. And a lot of people did break. And some of them, like in the story, in the beginning in Key West, we talk about people who did break and commit, and people who died by suicide, unfortunately, because they just couldn't do it anymore. That's that depression that came and overwhelmed folks. And again, there was not a lot of government help for these people because they had decided that it was not the people who were living in this island or in these archipelagos did not have the higher tax brackets to justify the amount of money that it would take to keep the roads from flooding, to put the construction in, to do that sort of a thing, to pay the taxes. They talk about that a lot in the book, or Jake Biddle talks a lot about that in the book. And depending on the area of where people live, like for instance, when we get to talking about Miami, and we talk about the rich and the wealthy and the not wealthy, or the have and the not haves. In this particular area, the land that is being the most affected by climate change are all the properties closest to the beach. Why? Because that is the most desirable and most expensive land, but it is also where we see a lot of erosion happening. So all of the marginalized people, like the Black folks and other marginalized groups, have land that is higher up and farther away from the beaches. They're getting less affected by climate change than all the wealthy people, non-BIPOC folk down closest to the beach. That's why that real estate is so expensive. But even those folks who are more well off and are more well to do are finding that they don't have the money to mitigate some of these higher insurance premiums. And one of the stories, this one is out of California. They are talking about a couple who are going to have to pay $8,000 a month premiums because they live in a fire zone in California. I want to say it's Palo Alto, the Palo Alto fires. Speaking of which, they just had that whole Black neighborhood in Altadena, California, and the last wildfires. A lot of those people were getting advice and recommendations from people who had gone through climate change, and they were they were displaced by climate issues. I'm trying to avoid saying climate refugees because I'm getting the word mixed up, and I don't want to just label these people as refugees because that means you come from another country. That means you're coming from another country. So I want to say they were displaced by climate issues. Anywho, a lot of those people they kept saying, hey, don't sell your land. Don't sell your land. Don't sell it, because what will happen is developers will come in, buy up all the land because people are needing relief. And I'm not going to poo-poo people who decided to sell or who did not decide to sell, because that's really personal and it's a really hard decision to have to make in such a really tumultuous time. But anywho, a lot of those people were being told, hey, do not sell because sometimes this recovery will happen and then your property value will go up and you sold your land for cheaply, and now you're not getting the value and you're not getting what it's worth. And I just noticed that. And then also all those poor people in Appalachia with that flood that just went through. I want to say that happened, I feel like it happened last year. It could have been, I feel like it was 2024. It could have been 2023. Either way, a lot of those people are still waiting for their homes. They're waiting for housing. They're waiting for FEMA trailers. They're still having to deal with the outfall of that. That's how long things can take for relief to come. And to ask people to wait that out is, I don't want to say unconscionable. I just want to say it's not realistic for a lot of people. Some folks do have the money. They talk about that a lot in this book, about how the wealthier people who were able to afford the higher insurance premiums or who were able to afford better insurance are going to be the ones who are going to get help first. So let's use the fire in Palo Alto, for example. 2,000 people, 3,000 people don't have anywhere to go. I remember they were handing out masks to these folks. So maybe there is housing a little bit farther south from the disaster that happened. But who gets that housing? The first people who can afford to pay for it. That's who. It doesn't mean that everybody got a house. It means the people who could afford to get the home. And the issue with that is there is also a housing crisis to contend with. There is also real estate development in areas that there should have never been any real estate developed, but they did it so quickly and so fast without any thought to the future or how this would impact people and cultures and communities. And those people need to bear some type of responsibility as well. You could find yourself being someone who bought a house in a neighborhood that you could afford and something that you are maybe trying to invest in to leave to future generations, and you can find yourself priced out of that, because that happened to a lot of people. They talked about that in Arizona and in Alaska and also in California as well, in the stories in the interviews in the book, where people specifically bought in a neighborhood that they knew they could afford to live in and develop and grow in, but then this disaster struck, and now the payments that they're getting back from their insurance or the buyout that they were getting from FEMA is not even enough for a down payment for them to move to put onto another place. So people have to start over again. And some people just are exhausted with that. So they leave California or leave Florida or leave wherever they're leaving altogether. And in that absence, there is a void. In their absence, there is a void of culture, community, people, places. And I really think that that's the biggest tragedy, is that more and more of us are going to have to contend with this. And I'll wrap up with this. I will wrap up with this and just say that sometimes people who have a lot of resources and access to resources don't think that the problems that those that have less resources than them is going to affect them. And it does. Eventually, it does. So I think that this is something that we are all going to have to contend with sooner rather than later. And I think that it's going to take a lot of compassion and patience to help our community members get through this, and to help us too. Oops, excuse me, y'all. And to help us as well. Anywho, this was a wonderful book. Let me get the audio person's name, because I did, like I usually do, I did a tandem read of the book. So I listened to the audio and I read the book. And the audio, let me see, is read by Matt Godfrey. I'm trying to get better about that, y'all, by listing the audio narrator. Matt Godfrey did a wonderful job. Jake Biddle definitely did a great job humanizing these stories. Again, I like to emphasize how Jake was not concerned about, when he was interviewing people, he wasn't concerned if they believed in climate change or not. And quite honestly, I'm not either. I want these people to get helped. I want us to think about how we have structured certain government entities or real estate issues that is contributing to harm to people. And I'm not even going to go so far as to say, except for the real estate agents, I will say that they was developing in places that they just knew they shouldn't have been, because they were going quickly and wanted that money. Because if the people who live in Egypt can figure out how the Nile floods every year, and they knew how far back to build so that their stuff wouldn't get flooded, I think we can figure it out too. I think we can figure out, well, which areas have all this fire, which areas have all this flooding. And some of that was brought about by human greed, because the flooding happened a lot, especially in Key West, because they was ripping down mangrove trees. Those mangrove trees hold the soil together, keep the flooding at bay. If you don't got those trees, what do you get? Flooding and soil erosion. Duh. If you are not maintaining the forests like the native populations did, you're going to get forest fires. Though I think a lot of people don't know that regionally across our country, native folks were tending to this land. They were stewards of the land. They were doing controlled burns. They were cutting things and making sure that these fires were controllable and they didn't get out of hand. So if you don't have any forest husbandry, going on, then of course you're going to have wildfires. If you are building in places that were never meant to be lived in for and put that great of a strain on the land, then of course there's going to be problems. So I think that the larger overarching point of this book, it is challenging us to question a lot of our values, question why are we building in places where we know disasters happen, and who's allowing that to happen, and why, who benefits from that, who doesn't benefit from that. A lot of the things too in this story, I said I was gonna leave it, y'all ain't finna leave it, I'm not done. A lot of the things in this book reminded me of the book that we read last year for Earth Day, Tree Thieves, and how there are communities who have been in an area and they were doing things in a particular type of way, and another entity comes and changes things up, and not always for the best, not always for the good. They definitely talked about that with in Louisiana with the I don't forgot the nation. They spoke mainly French though, and they lived in a swampy area. I forgot it's not Lanyap. I'm thinking of Lanyap Apache because that's where the people, that's the original folks who owned the land in Texas where my folks are from. That's why I'm thinking of that. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. And I would dare say they wouldn't say they own land, but y'all know what I mean. Anywho, this book is wonderful. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please come by and get a copy. You can also check out the audiobook. There is one copy on Libby. It asks a lot of tough questions. It asks you to stretch yourself and to think and grow, because we're going to have to, whether you want to or not. The stakes are high for all of us. These disasters are just going to be happening more frequently and at higher frequency, higher disaster rates. And so we're going to have to figure out how we're all going to support one another when these things do happen. Hopefully we can still turn the tide back. And I'm not even against development. You can develop in an environmentally sound way. And that makes the most sense to me, because then you get better return on your investment. But what do I know? A whole lot. I know a whole lot. Okay, let's see if there's anything else before we talk about the next book. Let me see. Okay. I think, yeah, the one thing though too is I really do like the journey narrative that was happening in the book. And it is a journey. It's a journey from what you thought was going to be to the way things are, to dealing with reality. I appreciate again how Biddle gave dignity to each person's experience and never sensationalized their pain. I really, really appreciate that, because it's easy to sit on high and go, well, if you had done this and you should do it this way, without thinking about the actual people who it affects and the people and the community and the culture. Let's see. All right, so thank you guys so much for being a part of the conversation for the Great Displacement. It's a heavy read, but it's also a very necessary one. If nothing else, I hope it helped you connect the dots between climate, inequality, and our future, and reminded you that every statistic is a human story. Okay, so before we go, though, let's talk a little bit about the book that we will be reading next time. Here I go again, pushing the wrong buttons. I'm sorry, friends. Let me do this. All right, so next month's book is going to be Loud, Accept Nothing Less Than the Life You Deserve by Drew Ofwalo. Drew is Samoan, and she's a content creator and women's rights advocate. Her writing has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, and she has been profiled by the New York Times, Nylon, and Rolling Stone. She was named Adweek's 2022 Digital and Tech Creator of the Year, one of Meta's Creators of Tomorrow, and one of Time's Next Generation Leaders. Ofwalo has covered the red carpet at the Academy Awards and hosts the Spotify exclusive podcast, The Comment Section. Loud is her first book. I love Drew. I love her commentary. I cannot wait to jump into this book. This book is going to be a part of our APPI month, which is Asian American and Pacific Islander month. And again, she's Samoan. And so that is why I picked this book. Also, it is a timely topic. And I hope that you like this book just as much as I did. And I will see y'all next week. Remember, next week. Y'all, I will not be seeing you next week. Maybe if you come into the library, but no. I meant next month. Again, remember to sign up for the newsletter so that you can get a lot of the, there we go. So that you can get a lot of the interviews that I am referencing when we're having the live stream. You'll get the discussion questions before anyone else, and you'll also get an invitation to appear on the live stream if that is something that you would like to do. And we can hear your opinion on the book, your ideas of, share your thoughts on what you read and if you like the book or not. Again, thank you so much. Thank you for giving me a little bit of your time and having, like I said, a hard but necessary discussion. And thank you, replay viewers. I appreciate you for carving out a bit of time and hanging out with me today. All right, y'all. I will see you next month.